Welcome to Jargon, a podcast bringing clarity to commonly misunderstood business concepts. We're debunking and simplifying the buzzwords and ideas plaguing today's business world and offering a fresh perspective on these topics.
Good afternoon. This is Bill Imany.
And this is Peter Purcell.
And we're back for another Jargon podcast. Peter, what are we going to talk about this time?
Why don't we talk about ERP? We haven't done that in a while.
You know, we do a lot of work on ERP implementations, and I think that's a very good topic to bring up, especially given that a lot of companies seem to be lately taking a look at upgrading their ERP system or moving to the cloud and doing some things different.
Absolutely. You know, and if you're going to go through an ERP implementation, you're going to spend the money, you're going to go through the trouble, you're going to migrate, you're going to get off the old ERP. Don't you think you want to do it right?
Absolutely. And there's some challenges with ERP. ERP never actually ever really goes perfectly smooth. There's always bumps in the road, but there's ways to actually manage it and allocate resources appropriately, right?
Right. And I always joke, and it's only a half joke. I say ERP is painful. It's painful. Nobody likes it. And our job is to make it as least painful as possible.
And probably we should say the implementation process is...
Yeah, the implementation.
But once it's done, the company's adopted and you're up and running, you're grateful that you have it because that's how you're getting your financial information out. That's how you're managing operations. That's how you're managing, I'll call it, the information getting from the field or your shop floor into finance so that you can produce your financials and help the company grow, right?
Right. And of course, what you've described there too is you're capturing a ton of operational information within the ERP as well. And using that, using various Power BI and other tools, you can get a good view on your operations as well. So it's not just finance.
Yeah, right. So it's finance, operations, and there's IT. And I think one of the big challenges companies really struggle with when they get into an ERP implementation is how do they divide up the work between finance, operations, and IT? Who does what? Who owns what? And who's accountable for what? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges companies run into is, okay, who's in charge of this thing? Is it business? Is it IT?
Exactly. And it's almost a matrix type situation. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, this is business's job, or this is business owns it. Business should be this key stakeholder. But I think when you look across a company, it's almost a matrix type responsibility.
Yeah, and I also think when you start thinking about that and use the word business, we can't forget there's a business aspect of IT. People like to say, oh, it's the business, that excludes IT, but IT is part of the business, right?
Well, it should be if you're doing it right. Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of it comes down to what roles do I give finance, what roles do I give operations, what roles do I give IT from a project perspective. So we get into these questions that our clients will ask, well, who should be managing this project? Should it be IT? Should it be finance? Who should it be? So Peter, how do your clients resolve that kind of challenge?
Well, since I've been around for a while, I've seen a number of models where, CIO or director of IT is the lead, or I see, somebody within business is
finance, you mean?
Or finance. Well, either way, business could be finance or operations. I've seen it where people will be pulled out of their day-to-day job and put in project management role. But the most successful model that I've seen is, believe it or not, having the controller be in charge of an ERP implementation.
Okay, so the controller, because he controls stuff? I mean, is it what you're saying? Because ERPs are hard to control?
Yeah, because ERPs are hard to control. But if you look at a controller role, and for this podcast, I should have printed this out so I could read it. But if you go back and read the definition of a controller's role, controller's job is to set up controls so that you get good financial reporting. But one of the key thing is, if you read the definition of a controller, which I'm sort of talking on here so Bill can actually look it up on his phone, is to protect the assets of a company. And to do that, a controller has to have a good view across the company: operations, finance, accounting, sales, marketing, etc.
Well, I just asked ChatGPT, and really it's a senior executive responsible for overseeing a company's financial operations, including accounting, budgeting, and financial reporting. So if you think about financial operations, that's where everything kind of comes together. My operational type stuff that happens in the field, be it production or service work that's being done, that all kind of culminates into financial transactions that need to be controlled by somebody. So in some cases, there's operational controllers, but then there's kind of a more senior controller type person that maybe sees the operational and the financial side. Is that kind of what you're thinking of?
That is exactly what I'm thinking of.
Because typically they will have purview, and a lot of the good controllers out there have spent time in the field or with operations collaborating with them, and that's how they get their job done, particularly if they have to roll out new controls and help align the business, right?
Exactly. Good friend of mine who's a controller said, the way you can tell a good controller is if you sit down with that individual and they can tell you how every single activity in a company has an impact on a specific GL account. In other words, every activity that happens within a company, how is it reflected in your ledger?
Okay, that's a really good point. I've never heard that before. I really like that, though, because you think about it, when someone goes out and produces a work ticket,
what does that mean? And what's the impact?
Or they go out and repair one of their vehicles, or they produce a byproduct on their shop floor.
Exactly. Because, I think, you and I grew up with the whole idea of a strategy map and what's in, what's out, what do you have to be good at, etc. But if an activity has no direct impact on a ledger, why are you doing that activity? That's kind of an interesting question. So
don't get me thinking too hard here.
Yeah. And that's probably a whole another podcast. But bottom line is, if you take that approach, you can very quickly figure out what sort of activities shouldn't be done anymore, because you need to do that as part of the ERP. But back to the original point, a good controller will know exactly what's going on in a company and has to, especially if they're going to sign off on financials.
Right. And I think a lot of people look at the controller role, stepping back, 20 years ago, like in 1980, and that was 20 years ago in my mind. But the
40.
The controller was like the bean counter, somebody who's
Right.
basically balancing the ledger, and that role has really expanded. If you just kind of step over the past 20 years or so, that role has expanded with Sarbanes-Oxley and the scrutiny on financial reporting, and you start thinking about the COSO framework, and you look at that. That's what the controllers might be using as a reference point. There's a lot of operational stuff. There's a lot of strategic stuff in there. And then I step into actually internal controls over financial reporting is exactly what you're talking about here. And your controller said it very nicely. If it impacts the GL and impacts financial reporting, well, that's a good way to think about that, Peter.
Exactly. And so if you look at one individual within a company that should have, a good view across the company, it's not just the CEO, CFO. I get that. That's what our listener is going to say. But truly, if you look at it, a controller will have and should have a complete view across the company.
Well, and frankly, the CFO, their role is really strategic. They're thinking long term. They're thinking, what does the next 5 years look like? Not about
the tactical what's going on today. And I cut you off. I didn't mean to.
Oh, no, but you think about it. If you pull a CFO who's basically spending his day being strategic into tactical discussions, either they're going to shut down or just not want to talk about it, or they're going to rely on somebody else to give them the information they need, or they might give you the wrong answer. Nothing against CFOs.
No, nothing against CFOs. The other thing is sometimes, and they really shouldn't be deep in the tactics of a company. Maybe if it's a small company, but what's going to happen is you're going to see their minds change on tactical decisions almost on a daily basis. I would if I were in their position. One day you'd ask me about an account, which we need to know to set up the GL. And then the next day, I was thinking about it overnight. Time out. A controller has to have that stuff set in concrete,
and they're the one who can set it.
And they're the one who could set it
because they know enough about the details of the company, the tactics of the company. So, going back to ERP, if you have a controller, that's probably your most likely candidate to, I'll say, be the day-to-day champion of your ERP implementation, because they can dive into the control aspects. Because a lot of times you're putting a new ERP system in for control's sake,
without a doubt,
or for financial reporting, and for consistency, process. And so hopefully if you have a controller that's process-oriented, he or she can also dive in and lead that aspect of the ERP implementation.
Exactly. Because, remember, when we do our process dialogues, as we've done our process flows, we're still, when we start thinking about steps, who's responsible and all that, we're thinking of it in a control-type environment. The reason why we're putting it in the ERP is to put control around it, and to make sure that the activity is done in a repeatable manner and in such a way that you always will get the same result for the same input. That's really one of the key things for an ERP. But I think as we go down that path, though, there are roles for other people. It's not just about the controller. I think I know there's strong roles for IT, the CIO or, the CIO direct report, somebody within the CIO direct report. And there's also on the operations side, I don't think we can just discount the operations side either.
Right. And so if you start thinking about those aspects, the question you really need to ask when you start defining the roles in the ERP system is who's accountable for what? And I'm talking about just from a process perspective. Who's accountable for system security, for example? Who's accountable for the shop floor? So then you ask those questions, like, for example, system security, who would be responsible for that?
Well, for setting it up and making sure that users...
Just maintaining
from a technology...
Making sure nobody hacks and breaks your computer.
To attempt to make sure that nobody will break into your computer, that is an IT.
Right, if you're CIO...
CSO, potentially.
If you're a huge company.
If you have a huge company, you might have a chief security officer.
So those type of roles around security, setup...
security, maintenance, upgrades, updates, change management. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about people change management. I'm talking about migrating changes into the software environment. It's basically everything that makes you COVID 2019 compliant. A lot of that falls within IT.
So really, IT still needs to maintain control of installation and setup of the system, be it in the cloud or not.
Right, and maintenance.
Engaging technical resources. Right. We're going to be providing, I'll call it technical support, but also probably development, because they're going to have to give them the appropriate access and everything if they're going in and doing development work. They're going to be overseeing the migration from configuration to test to production.
Right. And the big thing would be integrations as well. Not just customizations and integration.
Yep.
Now, what's strange is they oftentimes take on the reporting role. They should write the reports, potentially, maybe.
It depends on the report.
It depends on the report. And what we're talking about with tools like Power BI and the like, that really just goes back to the end user hands. So everything that it takes to set up that environment and make sure that environment is secure and that people have access to the right data, then that's all IT responsibility.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to give your accounting team or operations team the ability to set up new users and give them access. The division of ownership.
Yeah, the segregation of authority. Yeah. Delegation and segregation. Yeah.
Really, SOD, segregation.
Yeah.
Is what you're correcting me on, obviously. Is really the thing that IT needs to control, because you don't want anybody going in and setting up users or giving people access to stuff.
That is absolutely correct. Yes.
So you've got the IT side, which is really all security, integration, upgrades, managing the software vendor.
Yep.
And making sure that they're holding their end of the bargain in terms of service level agreements, escalating issues, performance issues, and database type issues that they're having.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, once you go live, I mean, not even during implementation, it's a lot even after go live, because ERP can be a beast. I mean, I always laugh, right? Once you get the beast, you bought this beast, you've grown it up, and now you have to feed it. And feeding is not easy. And that's what IT ultimately ends up.
So you think about that, there still is a project management role, though, for IT, because all those activities you just described require project management. So you might have an IT project manager as part of the project who's running all those aspects of it, who's joined at the hip with the functional project manager, which could be your controller. And you might establish overall accountability to that functional controller type person who's your overall project manager, but you might have an IT project manager that's working alongside that. The other thing, though, Peter, I do see IT bringing to the table, I'll call it some discipline around project governance, project management, and I'll just call it the 101 of project management 101 type stuff that they're typically good at.
Right. And if you have any issues, getting that concept, if IT has a little bit of issue getting that concept over to the business, all you have to do is refer to COVID 2019. Sorry, not COVID 2019.
Yeah.
Sorry, not the plan.
Or you could just call us and we'll come help you with it.
Yeah. Either that or just give us a yell and we'll help you. But bottom line is, there's a whole governance component. And if you follow the COVID 2019 model, it does a really good job of helping you balance between business and IT. But, it's kind of like just as you wouldn't want IT to be signing off on your financial statements, you don't want the controller to sign off on what you've done to migrate between two environments.
You're right. And what you've done to secure the environment. And
Exactly. And then on the operations side, don't forget, we got to...
I was just about to ask you about that, Peter. What about operations? Let's talk about that.
Well, again, it depends, right? We have clients that are just putting in financials and sales and marketing and, stuff like that. But we can't forget operations. I find that they often get a little bit overlooked, even if you're an operations-heavy company. So it depends. Are you manufacturing company? Are you manufacturing distribution? Are you, a services company? It just depends. How do you reach into operations and get the right person there? And that's where you do work with the COO to kind of determine what sort of structure falls within operations. But typically it'd be nice to have a plant manager or somebody at that role to be the functional lead on that side.
Or it might be a service line leader. So maybe one of your divisions or service line leaders, part of operations. A lot of people, when you made this comment, Peter, about how some companies are just putting in like the financials, like billing, AP, AR, procurement, projects, and that type of thing, and some basic cost accounting stuff, all that information is coming from the field.
Right.
So how do I make that consistent? I might say, oh, I'm putting in a new way that we're going to capture our work that we're kept for billing, but that also means that operations has got to line up on how they're providing the ERP with information.
Right. The minute you said projects, what struck me is, it'd be really easy for the controller or somebody within, a carpet walker, let's call it that way, right? You have carpet walkers and then you have people that get their feet dirty in the plant. But you could have a carpet walker, for lack of a better term, set up a very, very structured and fancy work breakdown structure, whether it's in projects or whether it's just a work breakdown structure that you're going to use on your field tickets and the like. But if that's not the way operations works, and that's not the way that your customers want to look at information, you're creating a nightmare.
Well, and that's where someone from operations can step in and say, look, we don't look at the world this way. You just define some work steps that we're going to put into a work ticket and give that information back to you to bill our customers. I don't even know what some of this stuff means.
Yeah, exactly. Now, an astute listener, my mom, will notice we haven't said anything about sales, marketing and sales. And, you probably will need somebody on that side. But the issue is, as we all know, salespeople don't listen anyway. They're just going to go do whatever they want. But all joking aside, it just depends on how integrated or how standalone a sales organization is to operations. Because some are fairly integrated, which make it really easy. But if they stand alone, that's a whole nother challenge where, you will probably need a functional lead from that area as well. But it would really be nice if there was tighter integration with operations.
Well, especially if you're doing a lot of sales and operations planning at
S&OP,
manufacturing perspective. And you start thinking, okay, my operational plan, which is going to be in my ERP system, that's going to drive my demand plan for materials, that's going to be driven by my sales plan. Well, I better get someone from sales involved in this project to do that. The second piece of the sales, the pricing equation. How do I price and how am I communicating pricing to my customer? In a lot of cases, sales will go out and make a deal with a customer where they're going to invoice a certain way or provide data broken out a certain way.
And operations can't do it that way.
Well, or the system.
Or the system can't do it that way.
They've asked for something that the system's not set up to do, so you've got to get that input early on.
Yeah, exactly. So if we were to step back, right, in a perfect world, to me in a nirvana world, what you have is, on the business side, your main lead would be out of the office of the controller or out of the office of the controller. And then you have a team of people from IT, from operations, and from sales and marketing that all work together to make this happen. And then, of course, in a truly nirvana world, we'd be there to help them.
Well, of course. And that's even the best of all. So we're there helping.
Then it'll really be successful.
Why do I feel like we're in an advertisement of something? I don't know.
There we are. You notice how I turned that, into an Trinergy?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. But all joking aside, it's really, we're talking about the brass tacks, essentially getting the right people in place to sponsor the different parts of the organization and drive change.
You're right.
All right. So, Peter, any other final thoughts of wisdom for our two listeners out there?
No.
Thanks for listening to our podcast today. Hope you enjoyed. Please rate us on your Apple Podcast.
Or send us an email at Bill or Peter
at Trinergy.com.
At Trinergy.com. Thank you.